What's up, everyone? Today we're breaking down the champion select between C9 and TSM in Game 3 of their semifinal match. So, starting off, we see TSM starts off with a Kindred ban. This is a little interesting because it's not a really traditional ban when you think about it. It is one of the more powerful junglers, but it isn't really one of the more contested picks when you look at something like the Rek'Sai or the Jarvan. It is, however, something that Cloud9 has played quite a bit, so I can understand why TSM would just want to remove it from the table. Cloud9, on the other hand, ban away the Sylas. That's classic red side ban. You're kind of required to do it because the champion is so powerful. Not really anything to see here. TSM respond with the Taric ban. This is a callback to earlier in the series when Cloud9 kind of played the Taric zone of bot lane and hard stomped with it. So TSM is saying, okay, that's really good. We don't actually have an answer to this. We're not going to let you pick it. This is the kind of adaptations you see in a best of 5 series, and this is what you kind of come to expect when somebody shows something that is new and wacky and different from anything else that is played. It's easier to just remove it than to try and figure out how to beat it. So Cloud9 are then going to respond with the Lissandra ban. So this is, I believe throughout the entire series, they ban Lissandra every game. This is a bit of an interesting ban. It is an incredibly powerful champion that is really strong at a few kind of specific things, but also really solid at pretty much everything. Seeing a team like Cloud9 ban Lissandra every single game, whichever side they're on, is a bit questionable. It's pretty indicative of the fact that not only do they not want to play against it, but also they don't want to play with it. They are not competent enough or confident enough in their ability to play a team with Lissandra on it. So they are forced to spend a ban removing the Lissandra every single game. And that's not a good place to be going into a 5-game series. You really need to be able to play most, if not all, of the especially powerful champions at any given metagame, or else you will find yourself drastically disadvantaged going into any match. So we're seeing that with Cloud9 here. They're forced to ban Lissandra every game because they aren't confident enough to play her, and they know that she is too powerful to just hand over to the enemy team every single game. TSM are going to follow up with a Kennen ban, which is also very interesting to me. It kind of implies that TSM is looking to win top lane really hard, really early, which falls into the TSM play patterns we see a lot of: win lane, win game. That's where they found a lot of their success. Kennen, as in particular as a top lane ban, is a bit strange. I don't think the champion is particularly strong. I think there are a number of champions you can pick that will not get destroyed by a Kennen, but it is very difficult to hard stomp a Kennen in lane, even if it is possible to win the lane by going even in gold and scaling later. If you want to have a bunch of top lane pressure, it's understandable why you would ban the Kennen. Even if something like the Rise would definitely destroy that matchup and be able to have pressure in a number of other matchups. So the Kennen ban is a little bit weird. You could argue it is kind of forecasting the Jace pick, because Kennen is considered one of the ways you can actually beat a Jace. So there is that side to it, and you could argue that Cloud9 from here should see the Kennen ban and say, okay, we're going to ban Jace because it is likely you're going to pick that, and it is one of the best blind pick top laners. So by removing that, we are going to be able to get a quite advantageous top lane matchup. Cloud9 instead are going to ban the Aurelia because, similarly to the Lissandra, they don't feel confident playing it and feel it is too strong to leave up. It's the same issues. It seems to be recurring on all of Cloud9. Before, even when Niski wasn't on the team, Jensen wasn't able to play the champions like the Aurelia or like the Akali, and that cost them a lot of pressure in the best of 5s at Worlds, and we're seeing it again here, is Niski is unable to play champions like the Lissandra, the Akali, the Aurelia, and it's costing them a lot of pick man power in these best of 5 series where your opponents can realize that this is happening and take advantage of that. It's an issue within Cloud9 that needs to be addressed, ultimately. So TSM going to take first pick. I would expect a Jace here. Yeah, incredibly powerful blind pick top laner. Um, it's really the kind of thing that you do want to take early because you're going to be blind picking top anyway, and by getting the Jace, especially before they can take it away or they can counterpick it, it really shores up your top lane. So looking on the side of Cloud9 here, you are looking to probably pick a bot laner and a jungler, ultimately. So J4 does come in, which is not a jungler I'm excited to see. I would consider J4 to be kind of a tier A jungler when there are S tier junglers out there like the Rek'Sai, like the Karthus, like the Hecarim arguably, and well the Kindred is banned, but there are better junglers available. J4 in particular in a lot of games plays out kind of like a bit of a worse Sejuani if you think about the way that the J4 interfaces with the game. You pick him because you want to have engage on your jungler, basically. Other than that, there isn't, and you want a somewhat tankier jungler. Other than that, there isn't a reason to pick J4 over Rek'Sai or some other more aggressive, more powerful early game jungler. You lose out a lot of early game pressure if you have a J4 against something strong early, like a Rek'Sai. So it turns the game into this state where you want engage on your jungler. So your options are J4, maybe a Gragas if you're willing to have a squishier AP jungler, or something like a Sejuani, something tanky. And the only real reason to take a J4 over something like a Sejuani, they're both going to be tanky. Sedge is going to be tankier and more powerful in the later game, but J4 does a better job of surviving early and can put on a little bit more early pressure than the Sejuani. My personal opinion is that this isn't relevant when you're facing down something like a Rek'Sai, because if you're going to get outclassed in the early game anyway, you're going to be vulnerable to that counter jungle anyway. You may as well get a champion that scales a little bit better and can be stronger in those later game 5v5s or 4v4s, and the J4 doesn't do that. The Sejuani, I think, does that much more effectively. So I'm not sure about all of this early J4 priority that we're seeing. I think there are junglers that do what J4 wants to be doing, maybe a little bit better, maybe not, but I don't feel that J4 is necessarily a strong pick. Tahm Kench is also going to come in for Cloud9. Really kind of basic early support pick. This is what you expect to see. Jungler, bottom laner, positions that are generally more versatile. They hover the Akali, which does imply that Niski might be interested in playing it, even though I don't think he has yet, and they've banned it every time they've been on blue side. But Cloud9 will pick up the Tahm Kench. This is very, very strong, particularly into Jace, because it helps shut down the 1-3-1 that Jace player, or the 1-4 that Jace is very often depend upon. So really solid support choice from Cloud9. Allows you to make those cross-map plays that shut down a split-pushing Jace. TSM are going to follow up with Gragas Akali. Gragas, I'm not a fan of. He has a lot of the early issues that J4 does. I suppose into explicitly Jarvan, Gragas is a bit stronger because Jarvan can't bully him early the same way that a Rek'Sai could, or a Hecarim could. We saw that in Game 1. So the main issues with Gragas is that he's not gaining anything by picking Gragas here, right? You're basically saying, okay, our junglers are going to fulfill basically the same role, except I'm going to be high damage and you're going to be tanky. You could pick something like a Rek'Sai here and say, okay, I'm going to force you out of your jungle and get a ton of early pressure because I am so much stronger than you early. That would be picking around your opponent's weaknesses, right? You could pick something like a Sejuani and say, hey, you're going to be a tanky engaged jungler. I'm going to be a tanky engaged jungler that is better at being tanky and is a better tanky engaged jungler. That would be picking to outclass your opponent's strengths, right? Picking something like the Gragas is basically saying, okay, I'm going to be a slightly worse version of you. I'm going to do exactly what you want to do. Farm for the most part in the early game, maybe get off an early gank or two if I have the opportunity to, and then try and be a source of engage in the later stages. So Gragas does very similar things to Jarvan, even though they are kind of very different champions if you look at them in depth. Um, but he doesn't do anything better than Jarvan, other than, I guess, DPS and burst, but that's not something you're necessarily looking for out of a Jace Akali team. So he disengages better, which is also not something you're really looking for with an Akali on your team. But Gragas doesn't necessarily add anything, and picks like the Rek'Sai, maybe even the Hecarim, or maybe a Sejuani here, would actually be able to give you some sort of advantage over the Jarvan, and the Gragas just doesn't do that. Akali as well. This is really, really early to be picking your 2 solo laners for TSM. Not only that, these are the 2 solo laners that TSM had in Game 1, which were very problematic for them. And because Cloud9 gets one more pick before the second round of bans comes through, knowing these 2 solo laners, Cloud9 has the opportunity to pick one of, or at least one of, the solo lane counters that they showed in Game 1 that they showed to be very effective. So if I'm Cloud9, I would really like to be seeing something like the Poppy come out here. I would really like to be seeing maybe the Zoe coming out, because we've seen how Zoe can be effective, very, very strong into both of the solo laners for TSM. We've seen how the Poppy is, while weak into the Akali in lane, is very effective against her in the team fights. It's very easy to basically take an Akali out of the team fight, and then the rest of your team can win because the Akali's out of the picture, and that was their only winning side of the map. So something like the Poppy, and then or the Zoe, and then trying to get some other counter pick to Jace or to Akali in the second round after the TSM bans come through, it would be ideal out of Cloud9. That's how you would really want to shut out this game. They instead selected the Gangplank, which makes no real sense to me. Yes, you won with it last game, but it's a completely different matchup. It's a completely different game state. You're not going to accomplish the same things. It's much weaker into the Jace than it is into the Kennen. And yes, it is decent into Akali, and Akali lane allows the Gangplank to kind of farm up. It's also not great into Akali. So picking up a GP here doesn't really add anything to your team. You're now facing down an Akali with a jungler who only has one form of CC, which isn't terribly reliable, a support who has no reliable CC, and a top laner who has a no reliable CC. You're going to now have a really difficult time dealing with this Akali in team fights, and if you had picked a Poppy, you would have had a much easier time doing that. On top of that, you're forfeiting pressure into the top lane when you could have had a winning top lane matchup, or at least an even-ish top lane matchup, by picking something like the Poppy or some other tank. So this Gangplank pick, I think, is really, really poor. It is choosing to lose top lane and also be at a deficit in team fights, because you're going to have a very difficult time dealing with this Akali. Second round of bans comes through. We're going to see Galio ban, so out of Cloud9. So targeting supports, that makes a lot of sense. The AD carry pool isn't particularly terrifying, and the support pool is to some extent. You already have your support, and they do not, and you don't, and neither has an AD carry. So you would really be expecting support bans to come out of Cloud9 here. And looking at what Cloud9 already has available to them, they have a Tahm Kench to shut down single target engage. They have a Gangplank who wants to play kind of at range and to get these huge AoE damage barrels off. And you have some amount of engage. So on the side of Cloud9, you're looking to shut down specifically AoE forms of engage, like the Galio, like the Rakan, like the Alistar, because they are much more effective at stopping the Tahm Kench from shutting down that engage. And on the side of TSM, you're looking to shut down lane counters to Akali, because they've already shown that they've picked the Gangplank that is almost guaranteed to go into the top lane. So you've managed to have a winning top lane matchup on blue side, great for you, but you also picked your mid laner really early, so now you have to try and not get counterpicked in the mid lane, which means banning out counters to Akali or champions that Niski in particular is strong on. You don't care particularly much about what Sneaky pulls out. As I said, the AD carry pool isn't really scary. The difference between a Jinx and a Varus, or the difference between a Lucian and a Kalista, are not going to have much of an effect on the overall outcome of a game, while getting that beneficial mid lane matchup really is. So TSM is going to ban the Zoe. Very strong pick, especially for Niski. Really, really strong into both solo lane Jace and solo lane Akali. So really understandable ban, a champion that Cloud9 arguably should have picked up instead of Gangplank. Cloud9 is going to choose to ban out the Braum. I think this is poor. Tahm Kench is pretty solid into a Braum. In the later stages of the game, yes, in lane, it's a little bit weaker. And you could argue that this is Cloud9 hedging against the Lucian Braum bottom lane, which would give TSM a lot of early pressure. But something like the Ashe or something like the Kalista to counter that out are both available. So banning away the Braum compared to something like an Alistar or a Thresh, even, you don't need Thresh with the Tahm Kench, but something like an Alistar or a or another AoE engage support like a Rakan would be really, I think, better than banning away Braum here. Cloud9 are going to lock in Zilean. Okay, I have some thoughts on this one. Cloud9, what the fuck? Okay, so Zilean is really, really good, incredibly powerful in very specific setups, right? Zilean wants the rest of his team to be, or most of the rest of his team to be hardcore engaged. You see Zilean paired with Camille, Nocturne, Kindred, top laners as well that go in. You see him paired with Akali. You see him paired with Kai'Sa. You see Zilean really is at his best. Hecarim is a great jungler to pick with a Zilean. Zilean is really at his best when the other team is playing front to back, which TSM has an Akali, Jace, and a Gragas. They are very clearly not trying to play front to back. And when your team has aggressive dive in your jungle and top lane, you don't. You have a Gangplank. You have a Tahm Kench. You are not diving aggressively. You are trying to disengage. You are trying to make cross-map plays. You are not diving into their backline. They don't even have a backline really for you to dive into, right? So Zilean already is, in this setup, is unable to do any of the things that Zilean wants to be doing. What Zilean is going to be doing against an Akali and an AP Gragas and whatever else whatever other engaged tools TSM is going to pick up is Zilean is going to ult himself or ult Sneaky, and then whoever he doesn't ult is going to die. Whoever he ults is also going to die. They're just going to die 3 seconds later. Because Cloud9 is on the back foot. They've already put themselves into a position where they want to be disengaging from the 4v4 and use the Tahm Kench to make, and the Gangplank ultimate are possibly to make cross-map plays onto the other side of the map where you can get a numbers advantage there. Zilean is not a disengage champion. Zilean is very bad at disengaging. Zilean has no reliable crowd control. You now have 4 champions who don't have reliable crowd control against an Akali. That's really poor. This Zilean pick makes absolutely no sense. It's not a lane counter to Akali. You're going to just be farming out until Akali is able to shut you down later. You're not going to do any of the things that Zilean wants to actually be doing because you've already picked a team composition that cannot use a Zilean. This is really, really poor champion select out of Cloud9. Just TSM offered them up 2 winning solo lanes. Here, we'll show you our solo lanes in the first rotation. Counterpick us. And Cloud9 said, nope, I don't want to win my solo lanes. Here's a Zilean Gangplank. 2 of the least synergistic solo lane selections you could have taken. Truly mind-boggling on the side of Cloud9. So, TSM is going to get to lock in their last 2 champions, their bottom laners. So we are going to see the Ezreal, which... Tahm Kench. Or, not Ezreal. Alistar. Alistar and Ezreal. Picked in reverse order for some reason. But this from TSM is interesting. This sets you up to both play the poke game, because now you're looking at a Zilean who is solid into poke because of the effects of the W, but not fantastic into dedicated poke. right? So Zillion is strong if he's into like a poke champion because he can W himself and dodge the abilities. Zillion into a more powerful poke setup like having a Ezreal and a Jace is going to find himself just forced out of fights, right? Picking up Ezreal here to go with the Jace is basically puts TSM into a position where they have this great dive and this great engage with the Alistar Akali Gragas. They also have great disengage with Gragas Alistar. They also have really good poke with Ezreal Jace. So if you're looking at a 5v5, not mentioning the Cloud and AD carry here, but if you're looking at a 5v5, we see, yes, there's a lot of AoE damage that can come out of Gangplank and Zillion, and presumably whatever hyper carry Cloud9 is going to select because they do need that extra source of high damage. But we already have this Zillion is going to have a really difficult time doing anything. We have now multiple champions on Cloud9 that are vulnerable to being dove, and you have this Akali Gragas who are going to be very, very successful at that. So even in a straight up 5v5, TSM is somewhat favored. Okay, so we will, if you're Cloud9, you say, okay, so we will 4-1, we won't allow a 5v5. Okay, Jace is always going to be stronger into the Gangplank, and the 4v4 has the exact same issues as the 5v5, except it's even worse because you don't have that giant AoE Gangplank anymore. Okay, 1-3-1? No, Zillion can't 1-3-1, especially against Akali. Okay, we will play at range and not accept a team fight, but try and force you to stay with us. We'll use our Gangplank poke to chunk you down and try and get favorable fights like that. Oh wait, Jace and Ezreal are going to outpoke the Gangplank. So already there's almost nothing that Cloud9 can expect to accomplish, right? They don't have winning lanes. They don't have an advantageous jungle matchup. They don't have that good engage compared to the TSM disengage. They don't have a better 5v5 unless they can get Sneaky to position really, really well and somehow land either a Jarvan knockup or double bomb or both onto the Akali to stop Akali from being able to be effective in a team fight. And C9, just looking at this, doesn't really have anything going for them. The Zillion pick doesn't accomplish anything. The Gangplank pick, yes, can be strong into the Akali, but not as strong as a tank would have been, not as strong as a champion that had reliable crowd control that would allow you to catch the Akali out. So I don't really understand what Cloud9 was going for with this draft. And they really picked themselves into a corner by selecting a Gangplank and Zillion into these solo lane matchups. And TSM able to capitalize that, realize, okay, so we've already won 5 versus 5. Let's pick a bottom lane that survives and allows us to also win at range and also disengage so that the 1-3-1 is better for us. Really, really questionable draft out of Cloud9. TSM's draft, it started off kind of iffy. Obviously, Jace first pick blue side, very, very standard, but locking in first rotation of Gragas when you've already banned Kindred, who Gragas is a hard counter for, picking both of your solo lanes very, very early, especially when they're solo lanes that Cloud9 has shown they're able to beat in game 1 with the Poppy Zoe counters. It's questionable. TSM's draft absolutely was exploitable. Between these early solo lane picks, between choosing an early Gragas as your jungler, it's not ideal. It's not the best strategy. I realize I haven't talked about this Jinx pick at all. The Jinx pick doesn't matter. Cloud9 needed a hyper carry. Their options were Jinx, Sivir, Varus. That's pretty much it. Jinx is the longest range of the group and arguably the best scaling of the group. So that makes sense when you're looking into a bottom lane that isn't going to have much pressure onto you because it's an Ezreal Alistar, and you're looking to, with already the picks you've selected, you're looking to try and scale into late game team fights. So Jinx does make a lot of sense. Sivir would have just been burst down in any team fight. The only real other champion you could justify here would have been the Varus, who does provide some amount of reliable crowd control inside of the ultimate, which would have been very, very useful to try and stop the Akali from doing Akali things in these team fights against your squishy zero crowd control team composition. As well as the Varus is able to build items like the Wit's End fairly early, which would be beneficial to Zilean, but not really the rest of your team. But the MR is useful against the Akali and the Gragas, and the Ezreal. So you could argue that Varus would be a better pick. The Jinx is fine. It fills Cloud9's, what I believe Cloud9's goal to be, which is just scale through into the late game, even though they don't actually outscale that well because Akali and Zilean is bad. So the Jinx, not much really going on in that pick. Overall, looking at these team comps, I would say TSM is absolutely favored. Cloud9's choice of solo lanes is highly, highly questionable, and really not what you want to be seeing coming into a draft like this, especially when you're already up 2 games. I suppose you can't afford to int away the draft and lose a game, but that's an excellent way to tilt away the series. Interesting draft. Really kind of solid standard choices from TSM outside of maybe the Gragas. Really some kind of wacky, weird choices from Cloud9, and TSM won the game. Turns out the wacky choices for Cloud9 didn't actually pay off. This has been TSM versus Cloud9 Game 3. I'm John Valentine. Thanks for watching.